So good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Margaret.
And how are you feeling today?
Feeling very good. It's a lovely morning. The sun is shining and it's really nice here.
That's good, yes. So Phil, if you'd like to begin by just give us a little bit of background to you, where you come from and your schooling and how you ended up in St. Louis.
Born in North County Galway, for those who don't know Ireland very well. And I went to school, in primary school at home, and my mother taught me for a few years. And then Eileen, my sister, and I went to school in Bow, partly because Ailish O'Tierney was there and she was my mother's cousin. And I finished my secondary school there, and then a few years later I entered St. Louis in Monaghan. Eileen had gone before me, and so was Carmel Solon was there as well. Actually, she'd been in my class. So that after entering the novitiate, after a few years, I went to study in UCD in Dublin, history and English. And after I finished my degree, I was asked to go to England. And then I was just there almost 2 years when we were asked for volunteers to go to West Africa. And I wrote a letter volunteering and didn't hear for a good while. But then in August, I was asked to go to Ghana. That was in I think it was 67, yes. I think it was 67. And when I arrived in Ghana, Sister Mary Dozea probably watched this, she was there. And I fell in love with Ghana. I've never stopped loving it. My heart is there still, yeah.
Lovely.
And it was an A-level school, and there were only two A-level St. Louis schools in West Africa. One was in Nigeria, in Jos, and the other was in Kumasi. And we were struggling to kind of keep the standard going. So my first task was to make sure my history students passed their A-levels, which I succeeded in doing after 2 years of hard work and hard study, because I didn't know any African history. I had to sit up and study it at night. But I had lovely students. One of them was the daughter of the then head of state, General Ankara, but I'm afraid history wasn't her field. But anyway, she was a nice girl. So when I was in England, in Great Yarmouth, Eileen Nolan introduced me a little bit to the Young Christian Student Movement, which was based on Cardinal Cardine's work with the young Christian workers in Belgium in between the wars, when he felt the young people were totally separated from the church, and the then Pope, encouraged him in it. And he based his whole everything on the See Judge Act, which has become almost part of the whole Catholic ethos of how we operate. And even now, Pope Francis speaks about it a lot. So you look at the reality. It might be the reality of a school, or the reality of a parish, or the reality of a country, the reality of the world, really. And then you look at it in the light of the gospel, and then you take action. And it's kind of reviewing the action. And I think that it was quite a revolution, and it's continued. So in Ghana, it was very well known in all the schools, nearly all of the Catholic schools anyway, and also in Nigeria and many other countries in Africa, French-speaking and English-speaking, and globally as well, Latin America, Europe, etc., etc. So it grew.
Sorry, can I just ask you there? Did you take on to work within the YCS or YCSW full time, or were you still teaching and working?
Oh, it was very, very not full time. I was teaching full time, but we had long holidays, and we didn't have any distractions like television or anything really. So there was time for other things. So yes, it gradually grew and grew. In fact, a lot of Saturdays we spent going out to the different schools. In the morning, we had lectures and on Christianity, YCS and all that. And then the afternoon, we had dancing and music. So the students loved it because they met the boys and the boys met the girls. And that was unusual in the culture as well. And that were the Catholic schools. And gradually, it became very popular in the schools. And one of my friends, he got money from Holland in the 70s and built a national headquarters in Kumasi, where I worked, where I lived. And it became almost the center of YCS. And we had many meetings on St. Louis campus school. In fact, when Sister Patricia Ojo and Carmel Mary Fagbemi, God rest her, were in visiting South Africa. They stayed in the seminary, major seminary, and they said they were St. Louis, and one of the priests got very excited because he remembered St. Louis from coming from the north of the country down to meetings in Kumasi, and he wanted to know how I was. So it was a bit of a shock to me to hear that. So anyway, it became a center for young people. And I'll just mention one particular incident, which was in 1970. We were asked to host the Ghana National Laity Congress to prepare for a Pan-African Congress the following year. And myself and Barbara Mary were there, and we said, okay, we'll do it as long as you give one night to the youth to speak. So we had the meeting, and in those days I was still in habit, and nobody knew who I was. It doesn't matter really, but I was involved with YCS. And the president gave a talk, and I didn't know what he was going to say, but what he said was kind of dynamite, because he spoke out about the behavior of the priests and the lack of work for young people and whatever. And I still have the photographs of people. It was almost like a world war between the young people and the older people, because older people were supposed to tell the young people what to do, not the other way around. And it was I remember leaving the hall that night and thinking I'll be on the first plane home. It was that bad, because even though I wasn't responsible for what they said, but of course myself and the chaplain, Father Harry, who was, we were blamed for what he said. Anyway, we had a big meetings with bishops, and then some of the older people, Joannis was one of them, started saying we have to look at where the youth are and what can we do for the youth. And it was a really new beginning, and from that there was a National Catholic Youth Council, there was Pax Romana, and there was YCS. So it grew very, very much. And then in 71, after this Pan-African meeting, because there were many students from different African countries, a group was formed called the West African Coordination Team of YCS. And Father Harry, who was the instigator, he got ill and couldn't come back to Ghana. So there was no chaplain. So the students, and most of them were high school, university, whatever, they came to me and said, will you be our chaplain? Now, I wasn't appointed by anybody, but I was appointed by the students. But I mean, normally the bishops appointed chaplains, usually very bad ones, so that was a whole new world, and it was wonderful. And because we had these headquarters and we had a lot of backing up, indeed, some of the students, I think some of them had graduated by this, they gave up 1 year and some of them 2 years to promote YCS in West Africa, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, and obviously Ghana. And we had a lot of training, a lot of meetings, went to international meetings in Spain, went in Rome in 1981, and we met Pope John Paul II. We wanted to we were asked by the international group to let the Vatican knew we existed, because we weren't very popular there, we were a bit too radical. And I always remember we were trying to look a bit more clerical. So I remember trying to find a veil. And one of the priests, who was a very good chaplain actually, he was from working in Cameroon, he dressed up in a bright shirt. And Pope John Paul didn't approve very much. So he really berated him in front of all of us. And the students were terribly upset. And I was extremely angry with the Pope at the time at what he did, because he was still very young in being a pope, and he learned. I learned from him afterwards. He was wonderful with students when he was a chaplain in Poland. But anyway, he was very clerical in the sense of how you dressed. But I think what happened was through all these meetings, young people discovered who they were and became leaders. I want to emphasize that, because I hear a lot about it in whatever, the young people aren't in the church, the young people, but through YCS, they discovered the faith. It wasn't poured over them. they really started to believe because they analyzed, and then some of them did courses in France, based on Paulo Freire, and so became very well known and very I don't know, real leaders. I remember the Bishop Sarpong, saying to me when he heard one of the leaders, a Beko, who unfortunately died too young, he said, how do they become like this? And he said, I'll send people abroad to become like. I said, Bishop, this has taken 10 years of meetings and more meetings. You can't do this just by paying for somebody to go abroad. It doesn't work like that, And we did go to meetings also in Belgium, international meetings, as I say, in Spain and whatever. And then because we were West African coordination team, we sometimes visited the other countries. And I would just tell one story, because we had many adventures. And this was a story in 1981. Myself and Charles Abugri, whom you know, Margaret, who facilitated the healthcare in whatever. He's one of the leaders. And then John Turkson, who is the brother of Colonel Turkson. We traveled together on the very posh Pan Am, posh for us because Ghana was going through a very difficult time. So we arrived in Monrovia Airport, capital of Liberia. And when we were getting off, the man said, you can't go out. He said, there's a curfew. And I said, what's a curfew? I didn't know what a curfew was. He said, you can't go out. And I said, okay, so we can stay in the airport. He said, no, you can't stay in the airport. I said, what can we do? And he didn't know. So it was a bit of a difficult one. So I went up to a man in a uniform. I had no idea who he was or what he was. But he was a nice man anyway. And I think he might have been Catholic. I don't know how he knew we were Catholics. And he said, don't worry, I'll look after you. So he called a cab, those cabs with, if you watch American movies, they have lights on them, which is normally. So he said, I'll take you. So he took us to a motel, which wasn't, I was a bit nervous going to a motel. And the people wouldn't even open the door because we were breaking curfew. And I realized the man himself, soldier, I think, was frightened. He was nervous because we could be shot because breaking the curfew. Anyway, we went into this place and we were very nervous. We got up the next morning, we had breakfast, and then we stood at the side of the road and we managed to get into Monrovia, which was 20 miles away. But it was a very scary experience. And then when we arrived there in Monrovia, we discovered that one of the leaders, Siafa, Liberian, was in prison. So one of the people, that was not a very nice beginning. And we were very upset about that. And I remember writing him a note and somebody smuggling it in. And I still have the note that he sent me out, smuggled out of the prison. He survived the prison. He had a terrible time. And afterwards became one of our great leaders in West Africa. But that's just one of the examples we had of many adventures. I could tell you many others as well. It was very, very, very interesting. But what I want to stress, and why I'm stressing this so much, is I want to pay tribute to the wonderful young people that I knew and how courageous they were, how talented they were. I tell people, anybody who's willing to listen, that the most talented people I have ever known have been some of these students in the Young Christian Student Movement and in Ghana in general. And one of my relatives said, well, I believe you because I believe what you say, but I really don't understand it. Because the image of Black people in England is, or even on the television, is changing a bit, is very much Africa is starving or whatever. But these people were not starving. They were very creative. And I grew with them. And my idea of being chaplain was to walk with the students, not to tell them. And I remember one of the sisters saying to me once, Philomena, would you please ask the YCS to do a protest against abortion? I said, I don't tell them what to do. They decide what to do together. We very much in the line of, yesterday was on the Synod thing. It was very much of walking together and discovering together. It wasn't easy. And being a chaplain, you were on the borderline between the hierarchy and the older people and the young people. And that's not an easy place to be.
Yeah.
There were difficulties, but I had friendships for life, and so that's my experience of.
After that, where did you go? what was the next stage?
After that, I came back to England. There's a story there, but I'm not going to tell it now. And Sister Dorothy, or Margaret McCluskey, was, I had various alternatives where to go and what to do. And she said from somebody she knew in MBW, the Movement for a Better World, that it was the year of young people. I forgot what year it was, 1983. And so through that, I joined the local group, the English group of the Movement for a Better World. And a year later, or 2 years later, I was sent to Rome for a training course which was put on for English-speaking members of the Movement for a Better World. And that was a tremendous help. I remember we had a retreat, and at the end of the retreat, the people giving it said to me, they had a message for everybody, and they said to me, Philomena, leave Africa for the world. And I said, I don't want to leave Africa. All I wanted to do was to go back to Africa, not to leave Africa. But anyway, that's the way the Lord works. So after a while, I was asked to work on a team of reflection in MBW based in Rome. So I was working in England and going back and forward to Rome all the time. And then in 1987, which was quite extraordinary really, I was elected onto the international leadership team of MBW, which was very strange, but anyway, that's what happened. And I think partly because of my experience of working for justice with young people, that was part of it. And I worked with two priests, two Spanish priests, one of whom had worked in Latin America as a missionary, and the other had been on general councils and whatever. And when I was looking at this again last night, I was trying to think of what I would highlight, and just highlight one or two things. The whole idea of the Movement Better World was based on Father Lombardi before the Vatican Council. After Italy was destroyed in the war, he went around talking, trying to give hope to people, because Italy, as you know, lost the war. And he was a very charismatic Jesuit. His nephew, Federico Lombardi, was the liaison person with the media in Rome, and I found that quite amusing because I knew him, but I found him very shy. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah. And from the general direction, we, I suppose what struck me so much and what we loved, those of us who were there, even those of us who are still here, would say what was great about it was we had a common mission. And it was a group that consisted of lay people, religious priests and sisters. So that was an unusual group, because in canon law there's no space for a group of mixed. It's you have a laity or you're clerical or whatever. But somehow we managed. But we did a lot of planning and a lot of traveling and giving retreats, but also every year, every 2 years, we focused on one or other topic. And while I was there on the central leadership, it was on justice, which suited me very well because I had lots of material. So we did a whole study on justice using pictures and cartoons and everything, because I had a lot of those from England and from my experience in Ghana. And I still have it if anybody wants to read it. It's a marvelous document, actually. Yeah. So I worked in Southern Africa, giving in 1987, actually, a group of us, 3 priests and myself, we had a leadership training meeting in Malawi for people from Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and God knows what else. It was lovely. It was interesting working with 3 priests as well. And one was Ugandan, the other was Spanish, and the other one was German Jesuit. Anyway, so it was because of that I think I was elected onto the international team. So it was a wonderful experience working with living in Rome, which was quite demanding in many ways. But I just want to highlight 1 or 2 things. Julio, who was the general director, who died far too young, he was only 58. When I listen to Pope Francis, I hear Julio. There's one quotation that Julio went to Argentina to help. He had worked in Argentina, and his last retreat or last work with the group, his last homily actually, and he was only 58, and then he got a heart attack or an aneurysm. And this is what he said, I still have it. We need a church, this is 1991, February 22nd. We need a church which is communitarian, or a community, a church of the poor and for the poor, a merciful church, because that church does not yet exist. Now that is pure Pope Francis. And Pope Francis, they both lived in the same city. I don't know if they met. I don't think they met, because Pope Francis was persona non grata amongst the Jesuits, and Julio in the end had to leave Buenos Aires, the capital, and go to the south, the Patagonia, and bury their books because of the rigid military government, and the bishops on the whole sided with the military government. So when I listen to Pope Francis, he sounds like somebody who was working in MVW, but very much reaching out to the edge, not just, and building the kingdom of God, which Lombardi, towards the end of his life, emphasized more than the church. The church exists for the kingdom of God. So it is a huge experience of friendship, of working together, an international experience. And then I remember 1990, we organized a meeting for English-speaking people from different parts of the world, from Papua New Guinea to St. Lucia to Africa. We had about 20 people, somebody from Ireland, somebody from Scotland. And I still have a poem that one of my friends, Borrico Morley, who somebody might have known, he said it was the most wonderful experience of his life because we worked together, and it was just wonderful. And this common mission of building the kingdom of God. Another very strong experience I had was working in the Caribbean. My colleague wasn't well, so he asked me if I would replace him working. It's about 2 months based in Trinidad with people from the different islands. I found that very interesting because these were, having worked in West Africa, where everybody had a very strong sense of who they were and the tribe they belonged to. I was talking with people who didn't know what tribe they belonged to because they were separated, who didn't know their culture and were searching desperately to try and understand why they were and whatever. And that to me was extraordinary. I just loved it, but it was a different experience of a culture of people who had been enslaved and whatever. I remember one woman saying to me how she looked in the mirror and felt she was so ugly, because that's what she had. They had imbibed the negativity of slavery, and I always remember that. And the last point I will make, I'm very conscious of time. I said at the beginning that we didn't fit in with any place in canon law, but we were put under the religious. So even though we were not only religious, we were also lay. And Cardinal Pironio, who was very much loved, he was the cardinal in charge of the laity. And he heard on the radio that he was no longer in charge. He was in charge of religious, sorry. And he heard on the radio that he was demoted to be in charge of laity because religious were more important than laity. Anyway, I remember meeting him. He was a lovely, lovely man. But anyway, then we were under the Jesuits, under is the right word. And the Jesuit Superior General at the time was Father Pedro Arrupe, who was one of the people I could say I most admire in my whole life. He's now going to be canonized, but we all knew that he would be eventually, but it took a long time. And he and Pope John Paul didn't get on, so there was a lot of suffering from him. But Pedro Arrupe, he had worked in Japan, and during the bombing of the bombing of the atomic bomb, and then he became Superior General in 1980. Anyway, during the council, after the council. So he really reinvented the Jesuits, I could say. That's what they would say, but many people didn't like what he was saying. Many Jesuits left and whatever. But I had been reading his writings and justice and even his life story. And I just found a man of great hope, of great prayer, of great vision, who suffered a lot for his vision and but never lost his vision. And
Sorry.
I'm nearly finished.
Oh
Yeah.
just finish that because I want to ask you a question about the MBW. Yeah.
We went to the Jesuit Curia offices in center of Rome because we were being now transferred from religious to laity. And the Superior General, who was not Pederupi, the Superior General from Kulbach, gave us a meal to say thank you very much and goodbye. I remember being there in this very masculine room, and I was the only woman, but that was an interesting experience as well. But Julio at the end said to the Jesuit, he said, "Could we please see Father Arupe?" Now, Father Arupe was in the infirmary, way up at the top of the building. And as I say, he'd been one of my heroes, and he was there. This was 1988, and he had already been there 5 years, paralyzed, couldn't speak very well. He had about 8 or 9 years of tremendous suffering. And it was such a delight for me and a pleasure to go with my two colleagues to meet with him in a simple room, a bed, a chair, and nothing else. But over the door was a picture of Ignatius and Francis Xavier, because Pedro Rupe, 3 of them were Basques. So people used to say, we were founded by a Basque and we were being destroyed by a Basque because of those who opposed him. So that is one of the loveliest experiences I had. I knew I was meeting a saint, and it was lovely. And last summer, I have his life story, and I took it out again, and it really helped me during the lockdown, just reading about Pedro Rupe. So there are many other stories I could tell, but they're just one to highlight.
I'm sure you have a font of stories. But Phil, I was just wondering there, maybe one question, and I don't know if you think it's relevant or not, but in terms of the promotion of the movement for a better world, like how was that carried out in practice? So you talk about going to different countries, and that is it through, like, would meetings be organized in parishes or something like that? And then is it still existing, the movement? Like, is it still
Yeah.
working towards a better world?
Yeah, a good question. Father Lombardi's vision was to renew the church, and he was speaking a lot before Vatican II. And he had a lot of influence on Vatican II, even though it probably wouldn't get a lot of affirmation because he was very, very critical of the Curia and very critical of cardinals and the church as a whole, because they were so happy with the church as it was. So basically it was Vatican II in a way would be one of the answers to renew the church. But we renewed it through a retreat called a communitarian retreat, again, based on the See Judge Act, looking at the reality, what do we do about it, and then taking action. And one of the actions was to work in parishes to build a parish based on, very much on what the sin is going to be about, based on the lay people working together to build community. And my experience, and I've had a lot of experience working in parishes, different countries actually, was the people always wanted, if you asked them what they wanted, what vision, it was to be a community, to get to know each other, to work with each other. And that was what they wanted. But where it failed was the priests found this very hard to cope with. And they're still finding it hard to cope with. They are in charge. And they're losing, it's very strange. That was one of the reasons. Religious life, a lot of renewal of religious life. That was it. But basically, through a program of renewal of dioceses as well. And interestingly, anywhere you could renew, and I mean, I talked about the justice document, having courses on justice and what, anywhere you can create movement for unity, create movement for community, create movement for a better church. And Father Lombardi, I was reading recently some of the books, and towards the end of his life, he was a great churchman, Jesuit, brilliant, about 3 PhDs and everything else. But towards the end of his life, he talked an awful lot about the kingdom of God And we're emphasizing that more and more today because of all the other religions. So the church exists to build the kingdom, but there's too much emphasis in the church for itself. And it's the church to build the kingdom, but other people are building the kingdom who are not Catholics or not even Christians, you know. So it was really to renew the church, a la Vatican II, and to give hope. And I just mentioned in Papua New Guinea, which is the other end of the world, the diocese renewal is going brilliantly with the lay people participating. The idea was, first of all, you look at the reality of the parish, then to build community, and not to get people back to church, but it's to kind of have say for instance a dance or a party or whatever, so people get to know each other, spend a few years getting to know each other, and then when that happened, you go into small groups around the gospel, and then and at the end you get into doing more practical things. So it's basically about renewal, and a bit like there's some similarities with YCS, with the Young Christians do with See Judge Act, and Pope Francis in his last book on I've forgotten the name of it, but I gave it away, so I can't remember. But he talks an awful lot about See, Judge, Act, and YCS did that, but also in some ways the Movement for a Better World. And as I say, the justice document, Julio, my friend, he had a passion for justice, a real passion for justice, and I think that's really. I'm not sure I'm being comprehensive enough in my reply, but something like that.
Yeah, that's good. I like the expression kingdom rather than kingdom.
Sorry?
I prefer the expression kin.
Okay, kin.
Kin, K-I-N.
All right.
Community and people
Yeah,
and that, rather than kingdom. Yeah. Anyway, Phil, that's most interesting, and thank you very much. I know you're a trustee here in England at the moment. Could you maybe say a few words about what legacy you've left? A huge legacy in Ghana, around, I suppose, around the world, wherever you've been. But here in England, what legacy do you think we, like say maybe the SSL and yourself, are leaving?
Yes. I've had a very exciting life, as you can hear, and I'm grateful to God for it. And in a sense, England has been a little less exciting, but very much down to earth as well. I worked a lot in MBW here in England as well, by the way, in parishes. What St. Louis, I think probably the biggest legacies are the hearts of the people we worked with. And the sisters in England, like we started in Redditch in 1912, we went to Great Yarmouth in 1920, to Bears and Devons 24, to Ghana for all that. Working in schools, but also very close to the people, visiting the people in the parishes. It wasn't only just teaching the schools. I think we were very much part of the local church, because we went to East Anglia, which was one of the most Protestant, in inverted commas, areas of England, because that's where, anyway, I won't go into the details. So there were very few Catholics, really. So we were working a lot ecumenically with people who were not Catholic or not even believers in many ways. So I think that's something, we left a very good legacy there. But also when we've handed over the schools, and St. Louis School in Aylesbury is flourishing, and St. Louis in Newmarket, then St. Benedict, St. Edmunds, and another one. And it's interesting that the charism, the leadership of the schools are very, very interested in our charism and in our founders, and very much into St. Junum and Duleva and whatever. So that continues in the church. But I would say also, I've always felt that we punched above our weight, because we've never been huge in England. We were still, well, the height was probably 50 or 60. Now we're down very much. But people worked in different areas. Gradually, as we moved out of the schools, we're working with bishops' conferences, we're working with justice groups, with migrants. with all kinds of groups like that. And I remember we had a breakfast meeting in the deanery a few years ago. I'd forgotten why it was. One of the priests organised it, and I was quite amused because people were coming up to me talking about St. Louis. I'd never heard of them, and they used Philomena, and they were talking about we this and that. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's extraordinary how much what an impact we have made. We're not one of the bigger congregations, and we're mostly Irish, which isn't always, well, I wouldn't say it's not difficult. It didn't help, but anyway. And yeah, I've had it. But I realize now we're in a process of dramatic change, but change. And I was just looking at, we've sold some of our biggest properties like Berry and more recently Newmarket. And there's so many people in the congregation who came to England, went to the States or went to Africa, went back to Ireland, who would be aware of that. But I was reading the quotation of John Henry Newman, St. John Henry Newman now, and he said, to live is to change, and to change often is to become more perfect. So I think if change is we certainly have changed and been changed and challenged by our reality. And yes, yeah, it's been an interesting experience. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Philomena. That's been most interesting, your life. So thank you for giving.
And I'm grateful to God and to St. Louis.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Take care.